All right, let's just jump right in. Today, we're tackling one of the most fascinating and, frankly, contradictory figures in all of Brazilian history, Virgulino Ferreira da Silva, who the world knows as Lampion. He was called the King of the Badlands, the King of the Cangaço, and his story is, and I'm not exaggerating here, a wild ride through violence, mythology, and even high fashion.
And that really gets us to the heart of it, right? How in the world does a brutal mass murderer end up becoming a national folk hero? And, get this, a fashion icon. It just doesn't seem to add up. Exploring that paradox, well, that tells us a whole lot about how we deal with the messy, difficult parts of our own history. Okay, so before we can even begin to unpack the man himself, we've got to understand the world he came from. Because Lampion didn't just appear out of nowhere. He was forged, really, in the furnace of a very specific time and place, the Brazilian Northeast, a region called the Sertão, during a period of just unbelievable chaos.
Yeah, he was a product of something called the Cangaço. So what is that? Well, think of it as this unique brand of social banditry that just exploded across the Sertão. You had these armed bands, the cangaceiros, roaming these huge, parched, lawless backlands, pretty much making their own rules and dishing out their own very brutal brand of justice. You know, it was just the perfect storm for absolute lawlessness to take over. I mean, first off, the government, basically non-existent out here. The real power belonged to these figures called coronéis, these super powerful landowners who controlled everything from politics to justice. Then you throw in these insane, brutal family feuds that could go on for generations, all driven by this intense code of honor and revenge. And on top of all that, the environment itself was just relentless. We're talking devastating droughts that caused mass starvation. So what you end up with is this total power vacuum. And the regular people, they were just caught in the middle, squeezed between corrupt police on one side and roaming bandits on the other. This is the world that gave us Lampion.
And the man this world created, well, he was just as complicated. This is where the story gets really tricky. Because Lampion wasn't just one thing, not even close. He was a walking, talking contradiction. A man of two extremes.
So let's look at the two sides of this coin. On one side, you have the man. And this is fascinating. He was literate, which was super rare for that time and place. He was an incredible artisan, a skilled leatherworker who actually designed the iconic outfits for his whole crew. He was a brilliant guerrilla tactician, a genius in that harsh landscape. And his origin story? It's straight out of a folk tale. He became an outlaw to avenge his father who'd been killed by the police. Okay, but then you have the monster. And the stats here are just staggering. Responsible for over 1,000 deaths, hundreds of rapes. He systematically used torture and mutilation as tools of terror. He didn't just go after the authorities, he terrorized the very same poor people that some folks claim he was protecting. And if you want to know what was going on in his head, just listen to his own words. He said, "For me, killing 1,000 is just like killing one." That kind of coldness, it's chilling. It just completely blows up any simple Robin Hood story you might want to tell. So we have to ask again, how does a guy that brutal become a legend? Well, a huge piece of the puzzle is that people started to believe he wasn't entirely human, that there was something supernatural about him. He had this whole mystical aura that made him seem, quite literally, invincible. And this belief was tied to a concept called corpo fechado, which translates to closed body. This was a really deep-seated belief in the Sertão. The idea was that through a mix of powerful prayers, special talismans, maybe even pacts with spirits, you could literally make your body immune to harm. We're talking about becoming invulnerable to bullets and knives. And a lot of people were convinced Lampion had it. And the stories that swirled around him just kept feeding this myth. People swore he had premonitions, that he could just feel a police ambush before it happened. His gang would often split up and hit different places at the same time, which led to these wild rumors that he could be in multiple places at once. Some whispered he'd made a pact with the devil. He literally had prayers and protective talismans sewn into the lining of his clothes. And then there's this weird twist. He was also a devout Catholic who revered a famous holy man, Padre Cicero. He'd fast during Holy Week and then go right back to terrorizing the countryside. This bizarre mix of piety and violence just made him seem even more mysterious and powerful.
And you can see why this myth of him being bulletproof was so easy to believe. Just look at this timeline. Over and over and over again, the newspapers would scream, "Lampion is dead," only for him to pop back up, usually doing something even more brazen than before. For the people living in the Sertàn, this wasn't just a rumor. It was basically proof. It meant that regular bullets just didn't work on him. And here's where the story takes another really bizarre turn. Lampion, the killer, the mystic, he becomes something else. He becomes a brand. He goes from being an object of terror to, believe it or not, a cultural and commercial trend. What's wild is that Lampion himself was in on it. He was a master of managing his own image. In 1935, he did something no one expected. He invited a cinematographer, a guy named Benjamin Abraham, to come film him and his band in their hideout. The footage that came out of that is just mind-blowing. You see him, his partner Maria Bonita, the whole crew. They're laughing, they're posing, showing off their guns and their famous outfits. He understood the power of the camera, and that footage helped transform him from a local bandit into a global celebrity. And from there, the brand just exploded. First, you have music. The huge star Luis Gonzaga started wearing the Cangaceiro outfit, and suddenly that look became a symbol of Northeastern pride all across Brazil. Then you have the film itself, Abraham's footage, which got Lampion's story in the New York Times. Then came fashion. High-end designers started creating whole collections based on that unique cangaço style. It got so weird that there were even rumors that the giant company Bayer was secretly supplying his gang with aspirin just to get the publicity of being linked to the most famous man in the country. Absolutely wild. But, every reign has to end, even one that seems supernatural. And the way Lampion died was just as dramatic and strange as his life, which pretty much guaranteed that the myth was going to survive long after the man was gone. So the end came on July 28, 1938. In the early hours of the morning, the police got a tip from an informant. They found Lampion's camp, a place called Anguico, and they surrounded it. The attack was sudden, it was fast, and it was deadly. But here's what happened next. The authorities were so obsessed with destroying the myth of his invincibility, they did something truly horrific. They decapitated Lampion, Maria Bonita, and 9 other cangaceiros who were killed in the ambush. They then paraded those severed heads through different towns and eventually put them on display in a museum. And they stayed there for over 30 years. It was this gruesome public spectacle designed to prove once and for all that the man was mortal. But here's the thing. Even displaying his head in a jar, couldn't kill the debate. In fact, it might have made it stronger. This question started to float around that really sums it all up. Lampion, nem bandito, nem herói, ele é história. Which basically means, is he neither a bandit nor a hero, but just history? The idea being that maybe he's too big, too complex for those simple labels, that he's just this fundamental part of the nation's story. And that argument is still very much alive today. I mean, when his hometown tried to build a giant statue of him, people threatened to blow it up. But at the same time, he's still this huge cultural icon. He inspires movies, books. Heck, the winning parade at Rio's Carnival in 2023 was all about Lampion. He's what historians sometimes call a dissonant heritage, a difficult, uncomfortable piece of the past that's both celebrated and condemned, a part of memory that just refuses to be resolved. So in the end, who was he? A monster? A revolutionary? Or was he just a reflection of the incredibly violent and unequal world he lived in? The fact that we still can't settle on an answer, that he's still so controversial, maybe that says less about him and more about us, about the really complicated ways we all choose to remember our most difficult histories.